Let me tell you about the most absurd trade rumor of this entire offseason. The Blue Jays going after Jarren Duran from the Boston Red Sox. And before you say anything, yes, I know Duran had an all-star season in 2024. Yes, I know he led the majors in doubles and triples. Yes, I know he won the All-Star Game MVP. I know all of that. But you know what else I know? Trading with a division rival for one of their core players is how you get absolutely fleeced. It's how you overpay by 30% just to get a deal done. It's how you end up giving away prospects who turn into stars while the guy you acquired regresses back to being a replacement level player. And that's exactly what would happen if the Blue Jays trade for Jarren Duran from the Red Sox. This isn't just unlikely. This should be impossible. But knowing the Blue Jays, they're probably already on the phone. Here's the reality of the Jarren Duran situation. He had a career year in 2024, 8.7 wins above replacement, 21 home runs, 48 doubles, 14 triples, a 342 on-base percentage, an 834 OPS. That was spectacular. That was legitimately elite production. But you know what happened in 2025? Regression. Massive, predictable regression. His batting average dropped to 256. His OPS fell to 774. His WAR got cut almost in half to 4.6. His defense, which graded out positively in 2024 for the first time in his career, went back to being below average with -3 outs above average. This is who Jarren Duran actually is. The 2025 version is the real player. The 2024 version was lightning in a bottle that won't be captured again. And here's where it gets really stupid. The Red Sox don't want to trade Duran to the Blue Jays. They actively don't want to do it. Multiple reports have indicated that Boston would prefer to keep him in-house rather than trade him within the division. They know that trading a good player to a division rival makes you look foolish if that player continues producing. So if the Red Sox are going to trade Duran at all, they're going to send him to the National League or to the AL West. They're not going to strengthen a team they play 19 times a year, which means if the Blue Jays want him, they'd have to massively overpay. They'd have to offer a package that the Red Sox can't refuse despite their reluctance to trade within the division. That's the division rival tax, and it's real, and it's expensive, and the Blue Jays would be dumb enough to pay it. Let's talk about what Boston would demand in a trade. According to reports from Fox Sports, the Blue Jays would need to send at least 2 of their top pitching prospects, names like Barriera, Juaron Watts-Brown, Ryan Jennings, Landen Maroudis. That's the starting point, not the entire package, the starting point. Because the Red Sox don't need outfielders. They have Roman Anthony, who's the #1 prospect in all of baseball. They have Ceddanne Rafaela, who's one of the best defensive center fielders in the game. They have Wilyer Abreu, who won back-to-back Gold Gloves. They're stacked in the outfield. What they need is pitching. So any trade for Duran would be built around multiple high-level pitching prospects. And the Blue Jays, who are desperately thin in starting pitching depth, would be gutting their future to acquire a player coming off a down year. That's insanity. But here's the part that should make every Blue Jays fan's blood boil. The Red Sox almost traded Duran at the deadline in July. The Padres reportedly offered Dylan Cease, who was having a down year but is still a legitimate ace, plus Leodalis DeVries, who was a top 30 prospect in baseball, plus more pieces. And the Red Sox said no. They turned down an offer that included a Cy Young caliber pitcher and a top prospect because they valued Duran that highly. So if Boston rejected that package, what makes anyone think they'd trade him to Toronto for anything less? The Blue Jays would have to beat that offer. They'd have to give up more than a frontline starter and a top 30 prospect. That's the price of doing business with a division rival. And that price is completely unreasonable for a player whose 2025 season suggests his 2024 was an outlier. The defensive decline is particularly concerning because that was supposed to be Duran's calling card this year. After spending most of his career in center field, he moved to left to make room for Rafaela, and his defense cratered, -3 outs above average. -5 defensive runs saved. He's been a liability in left field at Fenway Park, which has one of the easier left field dimensions in baseball. Now imagine him trying to play left at Rogers Center, which is a completely different park with different dimensions. There's zero guarantee his defense improves with a change of scenery. In fact, it might get worse, but the Blue Jays would be betting on him returning to his 2024 form, both offensively and defensively. That's not one gamble, that's two separate gambles, both of which are unlikely to pay off. Let me walk you through what actually happened this season with Duran, because the numbers tell a story that the highlights don't. His strikeout rate jumped back up to 24.3% after he cut it to 21.4% in 2024. His isolated power dropped from 207 to 183. His weighted runs created plus fell from 141 to 109. His weighted on-base average declined from 381 to 333. Every single advanced metric shows regression. Every single indicator points to 2025 being closer to his true talent level than 2024. But the Blue Jays are going to ignore all of that because they're desperate for outfield help after Anthony Santander got injured. They're going to chase the All-Star season and ignore the regression. That's what they always do. The Red Sox have an outfield logjam. That's the only reason Duran is even being discussed in trade rumors. Roman Anthony is the future. Ceddanne Rafaela is elite defensively and just 24 years old. Wilyer Abreu has one more year of team control than Duran and is a better defender. Boston has to move someone to create playing time. And Duran, despite his 2024 breakout, is the most expendable because of his age and his regression. He's 29 years old heading into next season. He's under team control through 2028, which gives him value, but he's not young anymore. He's entering his decline phase, and the Blue Jays would be trading for him right as he starts that decline. That's terrible timing. That's buying high on a depreciating asset. Here's what really bothers me about this entire situation. The Blue Jays already learned this lesson with George Springer. They signed him to a big contract after he had some huge seasons with the Astros. And what happened? Injuries, decline, regression. He's been fine, but nowhere near worth the money they paid him. And now they're about to do the exact same thing with Duran, except worse, because they'd be giving up prospects on top of taking on his contract. Duran avoided arbitration before 2025 by signing a $3.75 million deal with a club option for 2026 at $8 million. The Red Sox will almost certainly pick up that option, so the Blue Jays would be on the hook for $8 million in 2026, then arbitration for 2027 and 2028. That's not prohibitively expensive, but it's real money for a player whose production is declining, and they'd be giving up multiple top prospects to take on that contract. The math doesn't work. ESPN's Jeff Passan recently categorized trade candidates into 3 tiers. The probably won't go tier, the will they be traded tier, and the where will they go tier. Duran was in the will they be traded tier, not the where will they go tier. That means there's legitimate uncertainty about whether the Red Sox will even move him. They might just keep him and figure out the playing time situation. They might decide his value to them is greater than what they can get back in a trade. And if that's the case, the Blue Jays are wasting their time even making calls. But they're going to make calls anyway because that's what they do. They chase players who aren't available and ignore players who are. They focus on the hardest deals to make and neglect the easy wins. That's organizational incompetence. Let's also address the fit issue because this matters. The Blue Jays supposedly need outfield help, but Duran is a left-handed hitter. Their lineup is already too left-handed. They already struggle against certain types of pitching. Adding another lefty bat doesn't solve that problem. It makes it worse. Yes, Duran has power and speed. Yes, he can play multiple outfield positions, but he doesn't address their actual need, which is right-handed power. So even if they got him at a reasonable price, which they wouldn't, he's not the right fit for what they're trying to build. But the Blue Jays don't think about fit. They think about names. They think about all-star appearances. They think about making moves that generate buzz. And Jarren Duran checks those boxes, even though he doesn't check the boxes that actually matter for winning games. The Blue Jays were reportedly one of the teams interested in Duran at the trade deadline back in July. According to Fox Sports, Toronto could have been a landing spot for him if the Red Sox decided to sell. But Boston didn't sell. They traded for Steven Matz and Dustin May. They made a playoff push. And Duran stayed. So the Blue Jays had their chance, and it didn't happen. Now, 6 months later, they're supposedly still interested. But the situation has changed. The Red Sox are no longer on the fence about their direction. They're committed to competing. They're building around their young core. And Duran, despite his regression, is still part of that. The likelihood of him being traded has decreased, not increased. But the Blue Jays are going to keep pushing because they don't understand when to walk away. Here's my prediction about what happens with this entire situation. The Blue Jays make an offer. The Red Sox counter with an absurd asking price that includes multiple top 10 prospects. The Blue Jays balk. The negotiations stall. Boston trades Duran to a National League team for less than what Toronto offered. And the Blue Jays end up with nobody because they wasted time pursuing an unrealistic target instead of finding a realistic solution. That's the Blue Jays way. That's what they've done for years. They chase the impossible and ignore the possible. They focus on the players they can't get and overlook the players they can. And then they act surprised when they come up empty. But let's say, hypothetically, the Blue Jays actually pull off this trade. Let's say they give up 2 or 3 top prospects and acquire Jarren Duran from the Red Sox. What happens next? Year 1, Duran plays 140 games. He hits .260 with 18 home runs and 25 stolen bases. He's fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. His defense continues to decline. His offensive production continues to regress toward his career averages. Year 2, he's hitting .245 with declining power and speed. The prospects the Blue Jays traded away are starting to produce for the Red Sox. The fan base is questioning why they gave up so much for a declining player. Year 3, Duran is a bench player being paid in arbitration. And everyone looks back wondering how they didn't see this coming when all the warning signs were there from the very beginning. That's the most likely outcome. That's what happens when you trade for a player coming off a career year who just showed massive regression. The bottom line is this. Trading for Jarren Duran makes no sense for the Toronto Blue Jays, not at the price the Red Sox would demand, not given his regression in 2025, not considering the division rival tax, not factoring in the fit issues with their lineup, not accounting for his age and declining defensive metrics. There is no universe in which acquiring Duran from Boston makes the Blue Jays better enough to justify what they'd have to give up. Zero. But that won't stop them from trying. That won't stop them from making calls and putting together packages and convincing themselves they can outsmart the Red Sox in a trade negotiation. And when it inevitably falls apart, when Boston either keeps Duran or trades him elsewhere, the Blue Jays will move on to the next impossible target. They'll chase another player they can't get. They'll waste more time and energy on unrealistic scenarios. And they'll wonder why they never get better despite being active every single offseason. This is the pattern. This is who they are. And Jarren Duran is just the latest example of everything wrong with how this organization operates.